Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracy, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone out there who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, email us info@thatalks.com, or you can go to our website and contact us via the contact tab there. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, thank you all for tuning in again, wherever you may be, whenever it may be. It's always good for you to join us here on THA Talks. We've had some fantastic weather, or some might not think it's fantastic because it's been incredibly hot here in the UK. In fact, last week we had the hottest day ever during the time I've been alive in the UK here. So it's been a real scorcher, and this weekend's been great. So I think everyone's definitely in the summer mood. And we've got a very interesting guest coming up a little bit later today. Someone who came on during edition 5, way back when the show first started. It might have even been the first 2 weeks that the show took off. And but before we get into today's guest, I'm going to go over to. In fact, I'm not even too sure where he lives at the moment. So in a minute he's going to come on and let us know. But we're going to go over to him. Another voice on the THA Talks network, Mr. John White. How are you doing, John?
Hello, Paul. Oh, it's fantastic to be back with you. Where do I live? Yeah. I live right down. I can see David Icke's front room. Right. I live opposite the Isle of Wight in Gosport.
Ah, that's it. Yeah, that's actually down to my airheadedness, that bit there, because you have told me that before. But as I said, it has been hot.
I used to be in Malvern in Worcestershire,
right,
for most of my life actually. But I made a move down here last year. It was part of my recovery from not having a great year last year. So new horizons. Sometimes that's what you need to do.
Well, it's I'm glad you're here with me to do this one. I mean, we both the guest coming on today is Ben Emlyn-Jones, who's had his own HPANWO radio network that's been on all sorts of networks, including the Planet X Radio, where a lot of people came across his shows. And he basically covers a lot of conspiracy researching, from the political side of it, and also the UFO Disclosure side of it, paranormal, a lot of this stuff. And you and I actually know Ben. In fact, I think we discussed earlier, I think we all met at the same time, at the same weekend. Is that right?
I'd say forged in the same crucible, Paul. Yes, we did. We all had the David Icke Forum meetup, which was a legend for anybody who was actually there. So, yes, we all met. That was fantastic. And Ben's a great bloke. He's got a good heart. And he's really dedicated to his work, and he just keeps slogging away, and that's how you get places. So bless him. I'm very interested to see what he's got to say.
Yeah, and I think it's a spooky kind of, almost got a reunion feel to it, this talk, because obviously we've met before in the past, and Ben has gone to strength in what he's done work-wise. And I think it's quite interesting the way we've all been into this stuff for a long time, and we've all sort of kept a certain authenticity and almost joining around the same area in where our mindsets are. I mean, we don't all agree with everything the same, but it's quite interesting the way we've kind of all walked that path, so to speak, isn't it?
Well, in a sense, we've all had David Icke as a kind of mentor, haven't we? Shaping us, and also giving us an ethics to truth seeking. And I think that's what you really notice when people don't have that.
That's it.
And they're mostly running on clickbait and partisanship and ultimately bigotry. And it's very obvious, especially on political forums, who's not got a real balanced intellectual centre in which they're making their observations. So, the truth-seeking method, always very important.
I think all three of us back in those David Icke days all learnt the very important lesson: ask questions and don't be afraid to believe things that are outside the box. And with that, I think we should go and bring Ben on board. Hello, Ben. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Hello, Paul. How are you? It's good to talk to you again on the show.
Yeah,
2013 was the last time I was on. It's good
absolutely.
to be back.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you were. I think you were our fifth guest on. No, you were fourth guest on the show. Way back when we first started. Well, I think it was edition 5, but our first edition was just me. Yeah, so basically, you were the first 4 guests, one of the first 4 guests to come on the show, and you had your own HPANWO Radio on Planet X that was very popular. But you still came to speak to us, which we appreciated.
Oh, not a problem.
And you're still doing your thing, HPANWO Radio. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, unfortunately, Critical Mass Radio is no more.
Yeah.
But I've got my own independent platform, and I'm broadcasting from there. So I've still got the HPANWO show. It's still going. So I'm really, really enjoying it.
I was pleasantly surprised. A friend of mine introduced a friend to me. And I said to him, I can't remember what led the conversation, but I think it might have even been about perhaps you coming on the show again at some stage. And he's, Ben Emlyn-Jones, he was on Planet X Radio. I used to really enjoy his show. And I was like, he's done really well. So, I mean, that was kind of quite random, and your name's really out there. And so, I mean, are you still working really hard on it? Is it something that you're really sort of pushing out there?
Yes, I am. I'm doing what I can. Unfortunately, Planet X is finished as well.
Yeah.
But I've still got my HPANWO Radio. I've got Third Rail Radio, which is a show I do with a couple of other guys, and that I do try to do once a week as well. So I think radio is a great medium, as you know yourself, because
Absolutely,
you're doing it too. It's a great way of communicating information in an easy digestible and easily disseminatable form. So, I think it's a very, very important thing we're both of us are doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard work, isn't it, though? I mean, it's sometimes when you've got so many other bits and pieces going, because you don't want to do it half-heartedly. You don't just want to do any old thing and stuff, and it's hard work to keep it going, and especially competing with the mainstream, doing it full-time with so much funding and stuff. But it's this stuff that's really gets out to the people, and it's why politics at the moment seems to be so... exciting, because it seems to be challenged more than it ever has been through alternative media, that they can't brainwash people as easily as they could. They're probably still brainwashing people, but not quite as easily as they used to. You know what I mean?
I find it very difficult now, because social media actually has really become a force. And there's some independent producers, like people like you and me, who do things on YouTube or do things on blogs and things like that, who are now exceeding viewing figures and reading figures than, say, the Daily Telegraph or BBC Online or something like that. So that's really good news. It's really great, this democratization of the media.
Alex Jones, of course, would very much be one of those individuals. So it's interesting that this week he's just been attacked for his aliens, Mars child sex-based story. But of course, it wasn't his claim; it was his guest claim. But NASA have actually taken the unusual step of directly refuting that this week. So an interesting connection between popularity and alternative thought and trying to repress ideas.
Yes, I mean, I haven't actually seen that show yet, but I mean, Alex. I remember I saw that NASA statement, but the very fact that NASA even replied to Alex Jones is really quite something. I mean, it's the fact that they would just ignore him. I mean, in the past, official organisations like this would just ignore you, and now they can no longer do that, because Alex has too wide an audience. He has too many people who listen to what he has to say. And he's changed his tune slightly over the years, and he's I don't agree with him quite as much as I used to, but I still think he makes some good points.
Yeah.
And he has a very, very important message, and he's free to discuss things that you would never discuss on CNN or NBC or CBS or any of these other corporate, state, cooperative organisations are designed just to mess with people's heads and shut down creative and independent thought.
Absolutely.
Which I would just say, thank God for super male vitality, because that's how InfoWars is funding its operation, is by direct sales to the audience, and buying through the InfoWars website, and letting bypass the corporate advertising industry, and therefore he hasn't got that pressure to say you can't talk about that.
They don't get donations from the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation, and he organises his own funding and things like that.
No $600 million contracts with the CIA for InfoWars.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I mean, one of the main things that I find fascinating about your work is the UFO and the aliens and all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people, they will roll their eyes and say, oh, it's a load of mumbo jumbo. Personally, it's something that I stopped following a while back, not because I didn't believe in any of it, but because I kind of thought, look, I prefer the UFOs and the aliens to come and get my attention rather than me have to go and find them. I find it was like a very confusing and time consuming, but I do trust your work. I think you're a genuine guy, and if I was to have an update and get the latest info of where we're at with it, where we are at with it all, so to speak, you would definitely be the go-to person for me personally, which is main reason why I want you to come on the show today, just to give us a good old update and rundown of the state of affairs with that whole scene at the moment. I mean, obviously the floor is yours. Where are we at the moment with this whole UFO alien technology? Where do you think the truth is lying at the moment, and are we still looking at a possible disclosure of some sort that can really affect the world?
Well, I mean, it would be convenient if the aliens would just do it for us. I mean, obviously, we're dealing whatever sort of kind of intelligence we're dealing with here. It's real, it exists. But obviously, it's difficult to know what its motives are. I mean, anthropomorphizing extraterrestrials is very difficult. You try to imagine what they would do, but we can only imagine what we would do in that situation. And we don't know how they think. We don't know what their psychology is like. But the situation with disclosure with a capital D, that is the full, frank, public admission that there's an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. This is a fact. It is happening. The evidence is overwhelming. There's also evidence that the authorities on this planet know more than they are saying, and they're deliberately keeping this truth from us. Now, there's lots of people like Dr. Stephen Greer, Stephen Bassett, and lots of others, Richard Dolan, who are trying to work to end that situation. I'm one of those, and I'm hoping that by our efforts we can perhaps reach a critical mass where there can be some kind of revelation. Now, I'm dubious actually about the neat and simple willing disclosure. That is where the government simply come out on a stage. You get like the Prime Minister or the President of the United States come out onto a podium and say, there's somebody out there. We know about it. We've known about it for all these years, and we're telling you now. Sorry, we didn't tell you before. Now, that to me is very unlikely to happen because of the nature. Firstly, the nature of the secret, and the effect it would have from their perspective on their ability to control us, and secondly, the fact that they have kept the secret in the first place for so long. We're talking, well over 70 years now, if you include not just extraterrestrial encounters, but also the free energy issue when it comes to inventors like Nikola Tesla and people who are very human, who have made advances in the area of anti-gravity propulsion systems, free energy technology that would provide unlimited, clean, safe sources of energy for everyone in the world, which of course would revolutionize the world like nothing else ever would. They are in a position now where they'd have to admit that they kept that quiet. They kept it quiet for close to a century at least. And as a result, there's been enormous suffering in the world, and there's been a lot of destruction, environmental destruction, and human suffering as a result of them keeping the secret. And they're going to I can't see how they could spin that into a situation where they could come out looking, smelling like roses, or even close to, even smelling like daisies, quite frankly. There's no way they could possibly manipulate that into that situation. It would be very obvious that they did it for their benefit. They did it at enormous detriment to us. And
what level?
That's the kind of confession you cannot make. That kind of confession. If you're in government.
Sorry to interrupt, but
people go berserk about MPs' expenses and duck ponds and things like that. I was
just about to say, with regards to how deep this classified information is, would you say people like Theresa May or someone like that, would you think that they're on the level where they know about extraterrestrials, or do you think it's deeper that they have no idea?
I think she'll know what she has to know. I mean, the deep state will brief her to the extent that she needs to be briefed. She'll know what she has to know to do her job within the system. She will know no more than that. I think different people in public positions different people know different things. They're given different amounts of information. There's some suggestion that Bill Clinton, when he was US president, tried to get more information than he was allowed, and he was stonewalled. Basically, he was told, "No, you can't know this, Mr. President." He said, "I'm the president." He said, "I don't care. You're only the president." So,
well, obviously, Trump hasn't. I mean, if anyone was going to sort of try and rattle that nest, you'd think it would be Trump. Does he interest you in that regard?
He does indeed. Now, this is where I considerably differ with Stephen Bassett, who is one of my colleagues or one of my comrades in arms in this particular arena of battle, because he's head of the Paradigm Research Group. He's a political lobbyist who's desperately trying to get the government to come out with disclosure. Now, he believed that Hillary Clinton would have been the disclosure president. He says that she was the perfect person to be the disclosure president. However, and now Trump has been elected, Steve has a very dim view of Trump. He believes that Trump is extremely detrimental and a very, very negative development within the United States. I see it in a mirror opposite way. I think the election of Trump is actually something we should take hope from, because Trump is actually not an insider. I mean, he's very rich. He's a businessman, but he doesn't have the same background as most other political figures. He's never run for public office before, apart from U.S. president. Only Eisenhower was the other president that did that. And Eisenhower was the man who warned us about the military-industrial complex, interestingly. Trump actually Trump is actually, I think, a genuine person in the sense that he's not lying when he says he wants to make America great again. He wants to do good for people. I think he has a sincerity that most other politicians lack. The very fact that he got into power when all the forces of the mainstream media and the propaganda machine and the politics and the education, everything was against him. Yet because of social media, because of some people who were awake and aware of what was going on, he managed to get into power. And this is not what they intended. I think there's been moves to try and control him since then, trying to manage him and contain him.
Oh, definitely.
Hi, Ben, can I just come in here? Because Trump is an area I'm pretty interested in. Now, I have heard rumors that Trump has part of his plan for making America great again is to raid the patent shelf at DARPA and start to commercialize some of these DARPA technologies. Have you heard anything along those lines?
No. I mean, I'd be very, very interested to know more about that, because it's the kind of thing that's really is one of the things that made him very unpopular with the powers that be. The deep state are currently trying to contain him, and this is the kind of thing that they would definitely be very alarmed at if Trump was trying to do this. I don't know how much Trump knows about the UFO situation. I know that Linda Moulton Howe, another person within the exopolitical disclosure community, recently did a radio show where she said that Trump had been briefed in. She had it on good authority that Trump had been briefed into this situation. But I personally suspect that Trump has not been given that very much information yet, because he is the kind of person who he would just say it. I don't think he would keep a secret that big. He does have the respect of some people within the within the armed forces and within the intelligence community, which might lead to some kind of rebellion within that system, which could possibly lead to a willing disclosure situation. Although that's a long shot. I mean, I personally think that the disclosure will only come as part of a much, much greater revelation, which involves hopefully the dismantling of the New World Order agenda completely. And I feel quite encouraged since 2016 when we had Brexit. I mean, Brexit was another thing that the powers that be really didn't want to happen, and now it's happened. It's encouraging that you got those two things happening in the same year. It's as if the hidden hand is losing its grip. I mean, I made several predictions which didn't come true. I said that there would be no Brexit, that Trump would never be president. I said that Trump would die before the election if he became the nominee. That didn't happen. So that's a good sign. It's a sign that the hidden hand is losing its grip. This doesn't mean we must be complacent. We must be aware of things such as
they're going to try and regroup. Your optimism won out over your pessimism, Ben.
It did for a while, yes. I mean, I'm not saying that Trump is the saviour and all that sort of thing. He's not necessarily on our...
Come back to this American politics with disclosure. Now, another name that I have heard very intimately linked with disclosure is John Podesta, who was Clinton's campaign manager. And the other gentleman you were mentioning, who is very partisan against Trump, I imagine would be quite close to that group. But it would seem that there was some serious groundwork being laid for Clinton to be the disclosure president and for it to be perhaps a major feature of her presidency, because Podesta is certainly deep in there. Is that a name you know?
Yes.
The disclosure.
Yes. In fact, Stephen Bassett has actually spoken to him, and Steve has been trying to. He said always Google that guy's name to see what's happening. Now, John Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. He made a speech saying that he would actually campaign for UFO disclosure. In fact, he says, because he actually worked for the Clinton and Obama administrations as well, And he said that towards the end of the Obama administration that his biggest regret of his time in office was the fact that he had not achieved the truth about UFOs. Now, this was in a world where he was also involved in the Middle East peace roadmap and things like that, which didn't work out. Yeah, but he had his greatest regret, he said, was the fact that he didn't get the UFO files declassified. And that's a very, very interesting thing for the man to say. Hillary Clinton herself made some interesting statements. For instance, she was at Hustings in New Hampshire, and she said she would, when she was president, she would take an interest in what was going on at Area 51. Now, this is something allegedly that Eisenhower tried to do in the 1950s, soon after Area 51 was first built. Area 51 began in 1955 as a place to develop covert reconnaissance aircraft. But there's apparently he was denied access to Area 51, which in itself is incredible because it leads us to question whether Area 51 is even part of the United States at all, whether it's an enclave of the deep state. But Hillary Clinton said she would get to the bottom of Area 51 and UFOs and things like that. I know that John Podesta says there's question marks over John Podesta over there's Pizzagate and things like that, and I know that is a factor we've got to take into account as well.
Yes, I was going to put my hat, just pop in there and say he is a person of interest to us Pedogate campaigners, but that's a separate issue to disclosure, and we can't confuse the two. With it looking therefore like maybe there was a kind of movement that was getting some steam, but was based on the principle that perhaps Clinton would be president. That hasn't happened. We're not really sure where Trump is yet, and how firmly he may come down the disclosure route. So looking at the next sort of 4 to 8 years, are there any other countries where there's a high chance disclosure could come from in the near future? Like, I don't know, Russia, or there's been a lot of sightings in Mexico, haven't there? Or what else looks likely on your radar then?
Well, having spoken to people, including spoken to Steve, I mean, he's been a guest on my show. Steve has now basically abandoned the United States. He feels that it's the crisis caused by Trump's election really has closed this window of opportunity in the United States. I don't agree with him on that, but I mean, I still respect the guy and I wish him luck. But Trump Bassett is now traveling the world. He's been over to Britain. He spoke at the UFO Truth Magazine conference in Watford, where I actually met him, and I was there as well. And he's going to places such as France. He's going to Scandinavian countries. He actually thinks China might actually be a disclosure nation. I personally think Russia is actually quite likely to be, because Vladimir Putin is actually a very similar person to Russia, to Trump. Putin's election he's another one who's not popular with the globalists. He has certainly, for example, he turned down the International Monetary Fund loan, which was offered to all nations in 2008, and Ireland, Spain, many other nations took this IMF loan, and as a result, their economies have been devastated. Ireland is now in an awful state, thanks to Peter Sutherland, who's sort of the Rothschild's representative, who actually organised the IMF loan. Another country that refused to take the IMF loan is Iceland, and Iceland, thanks to their Prime Minister, Joanna Sigurðardóttir, they're now actually in economic recovery.
President God bless Iceland. We love Iceland.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a wonderful thing they did. It really is. They should be an example to the rest of the world. Putin, again, he's one of the few statesmen I feel any respect for, actually. He's refused the IMF loan. He's refused all kinds of other situations like that, which he knows are damaging to his country's economy. And he's sitting on a vast amount of UFO information because his country is the biggest in the world. A large number of files, which most of them date back to the time of the Soviet Union, which are still floating around. A lot of them are on the black market because when in 1990, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the KGB, it's an infamous intelligence agency, basically they just upped and left the building, and as a result, the files were basically left. Top secret files were basically left for anyone who wanted to get hold of them. Which means basically, if you want to get hold of a secret UFO file, you could, if you can do for the right price. They're on the black market. There's a brilliant documentary actually presented by the late great Roger Moore, the James Bond, which he and his team, or the team who produced the program, actually do this. They actually get hold of some really interesting UFO information from Russia. Now, not all that information is on the black market. I mean, the modern Russia still has a lot of it, and really, if you think about the size of the country and the amount of sightings there is like same as anyone else, there's going to be a massive amount of UFO information coming out of that country. So, and Putin being the kind of guy he is, who's not doing what he's told at a very fundamental level by the deep state, I think he's probably my favorite, odds-on favorite to become the person to give willing disclosure, if willing disclosure can happen. Because there's a part of me that thinks it could happen. There's a part of me that wants it to happen and thinks, what if I'm wrong? What if it could happen?
Well, with China, they are the country which is, I think, arguably is the most present in space at the moment in terms of space activity, aren't they? Their space program and their satellites program isn't it leading now?
It does seem to be. I mean, China. Well, we're talking official space programs now, not the secret space program.
Oh no, official space programs.
Yeah.
That's official excuses, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's an option. It's an opportunity to create a disclosure narrative.
They've launched several astronauts into space. They've sent a probe to the moon, which is the first soft landing on the moon since 1972, and the last Apollo mission, allegedly, if the Apollo mission actually even went there. That's a big subject. But basically, China, I think, has obviously its developed space infrastructure means they're going to be experiencing the same things that, say, the space shuttle astronauts did when they filmed strange objects up there, and very often the camera cuts out at the right time just to make sure that the public live feed never got any information on these particular things. The same thing happens with the International Space Station now. I mean, astronauts up there see things. I mean, it's been filmed briefly, and there's this Italian astronaut called Samantha Cristoforetti, who was actually up on the ISS, and she was out in space with her Russian colleague, station mate, and you could hear her exclaiming, "Oh my God, what's that?" And the Russian guy says, "Shh, quiet, don't say anything." I think at some point they must have taken her to one side and say, "Samantha, listen, there's a few things you need to know." And it's basically this is all part of the attempt to keep this from the public eye. Another way, of course, is the way UFOs are portrayed in the media, which is basically a joke. It's treated as a joke. There's been several documentaries, so-called, some of which I've been asked to take part in myself, and I have refused. And when I see them, I'm very glad, I'm very relieved that I decided not to take part, which are dire. They are appalling. And there's a limit on how bad a TV program can be by accident. I do believe this is a deliberate attempt to distort and discourage interest in what should be treated as a very, very serious subject, which should be treated in an informative manner. And instead they turn it into a circus, which is, I think, extremely destructive, and it's meant to be. And I advise people.
The TV method has always been, you could talk about whatever you like as long as you make out it's all nonsense at the end. Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
if you leave somebody with the impression any of this might be true, there's going to be some trouble. And there was the old, was it called Alternative 3, the hoax in the late 70s, or the alleged hoax that exposed that we had Mars base and a secret space program sending people to Mars. And then it was out on ITV, and they immediately denounced it afterwards and said, "Oh, it was a hoax." But it's always been, was it a documentary that got away and actually told the truth? You know, and I think there was another chap who's recently done a new film about it. Sorry, I'm talking off my head here. I should look up who that is. But it's still, things like that still resonate, don't they? But the odd times when it goes against the script are remembered for a very long time. Just thinking back to China, the difference with America and China in their national psychologies, it's when they had the Orson Welles radio War of the World broadcast, and America went mental and thought the Martians were landing, and they were worried there was going to be a mass civil disturbance, and that's always cited as a reason to keep the extraterrestrial truth from the ordinary people, that they can't handle it, that it will blow their minds, it will go against their religious concepts of the universe, and it will create existential threat, society will break down. But could it be that with China and the way that the Chinese people interact with the Chinese government, and the different nature of the Chinese government being far more dictatorial, could it be that if the Chinese government turned around and said, "You know what, we've met these visitors and we've got a treaty with them, and it's going to make sure that China is the number one nation in the world forever," you know, that actually that's something that Chinese people would get an enormous amount of pride out of.
I think
and therefore that may be something the Chinese state could potentially go for as a way of sort of creating Chinese exceptionalism and confirming their own specialness with their domestic population. Just a thought.
It could be, because I mean, you're right. China, I don't know specifically, but I do know that Chinese. The situation in China, which is China's a very old nation, is very ancient, and its culture, its political landscape and culture is so different that there's no doubt that the response by the people to disclosure under the Chinese system would be very, very different to that in the West. And of course, national pride would be an enormous thing. I mean, China already considers itself the rising star of the world. I mean, it's overtaking the United States in terms of its economic power, military power, etc., or it's getting close. It's catching up in military terms, certainly. But it's now the first place for foreign investment now after the United States. It's knocked USA off the perch for the first time in about 80 years.
It is worth pointing out that being second or third in military spending is not actually as close as you might think, being as America's expenditure is over half of everybody else's.
Yeah.
America's spending is so high in military terms, but
it's got a long way to go. Yeah.
No one else has got this network of bases all around the planet, of course.
But I think Steve has actually tried to word it like this. He said, look, whichever nation is the disclosure nation, it's going to be the prestige from that is going to be enormous. And I think China stands to, in a post-disclosure world, I think China stands to benefit more than, say, the United States does, because China, India, with their huge populations, their enormous resources, these sort of expanding countries will probably expand even quicker as a result. So from their point of view, I mean, what effect that would have on the rest of the world, I don't know. But from their own point of view, in terms of their own interests, it's probably more like that willing disclosure would suit them rather than the West.
The argument would seem to be there, wouldn't it? I'm also, one of my general thoughts about disclosure is that let's imagine that we've got a sort of Star Trek First Contact situation, like in the film. The Vulcans have turned up and gone hello, but they've also realised what a bunch of primitive lot we are. So they can't just go giving us warp drive straight away, because they've got to try and get us into some sort of decent order first, so that we don't cause a galactic riot. Let's assume that was kind of the basis of how, say, the US government might have formed some sort of agreement with extraterrestrials from, say, the 1940s, and that there's some kind of agreement going on, and that disclosure would be an end phase to that and the start of a new phase to that agreement, sort of from covert to overt. So with that, if that was the case, would disclosure necessarily have to be the full razzmatazz of a spacecraft landing on the White House lawn, or could it come in more subtle ways? I'm particularly thinking of how close we seem to be to acknowledging extraterrestrial microbial life.
Yeah, and
because once you start that ball rolling, there is a whole chain of consequence of reasoning that comes from that. Because once you establish that there are living cells outside of the Earth's planetary system that evolved from completely separate and outside to Earth, once you recognise that there is such a thing as xenobiology, then it becomes a matter of raw statistical numbers of what are the chances that you're going to get a planet with the right environment where those cells can start to form collective synergistic organisms, where you start to get something like a human being, and therefore if you can start to have some kind of humanoid life form emerging elsewhere, then you could get intelligence, you can get culture, and sooner or later you've got positive ETs. And even problems like, to say, the vast distance between the stars and can we necessarily actually travel faster than light and so on. If a culture was properly formulated, for long distance generational travel, or travel as as embryos, and get hatched when you arrive at your target destination. There are so many ways that life could expand across the stars, but just by admitting that there is such a thing as an extraterrestrial cell, then in terms of looking at the vast infinity of what's out there in the universe and the multiplicity of Earth-type planets, which you are now discovering with electron telescopes, doesn't it then mean that the chain of reasoning will then be in place where within 10 years of that, the common view is going to be, there must be some kind of intelligent life out there, And at that point, you can land your spaceship on the White House lawn.
Yeah, I mean, we're already halfway there in a sense, because there was that Mars meteor a few years ago, which did have what looked like the remains of single cellular life. Now, since then, there's been enormous advances. Now, the probes on Mars, which are very, very sophisticated, a number of rovers and things like that, Phoenix Discovery, etc., they seem to be experiencing, or seem to be delivering data that indicates they could have discovered life. There's also the Cassini probe, which is currently orbiting Saturn, which has actually found liquid water on one of the moons, and has actually water, because some of it actually burst out like a volcano type thing, and it actually
that's Europa, isn't it?
Oh, that Europa again, and around Jupiter is another one. Yeah,
Europa's Jupiter. Yes.
But this is Enceladus, which is one of the moons of Saturn, which seems to be very similar to Europa. Now, that if obviously in terms of sheer statistics, the skeptics will say, well, Earth could be just a tiny little living oasis in an infinite cosmic desert of noble gases and carbon compounds and nothing else. But if you have two samples far enough apart that they can't possibly come from the same source, then again, yeah, that's difficult. That's more and more difficult to explain away as a coincidence. Not only that, but there's some intriguing evidence coming from radio astronomy concerning stars that are quite distant. Now, there's over 1,200 planets that have been discovered outside our solar system, orbiting other stars near to the sun. These are exoplanets, as they're called. Now, a proportion of those are Earth-like. They're called super Earths and things like that. It's only a matter of time before we discover Earth's twin, as it's been called. And there's certain stars, such as one called Tabby Star, which is giving off a very, very strange pattern, which indicates some kind of large artificial structure has been built in orbit around this star. Now, Freeman Dyson, who was like a speculative futurist, actually did say to the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, this group of projects which is looking for intelligent life out there, actually did say that this is one of the hallmarks you should look for in terms of making a prediction. He made a prediction: if you do find this could be an indication that we're looking at some kind of intelligent life in and around another star. Now, that in itself would not be disclosure with a capital D, not in itself. Yet you're right in a sense that it would be a step along the road. It would inevitably lead people to look up into the sky and think, my goodness, there's life out there. It's not just single cellular organisms. It's multicellular organisms which could be as intelligent as us or more, in which case could it be possible that they could visit us? And then the next question is, well, what if they already have?
Well, yes. In terms of Dyson spheres, if we found evidence of a Dyson sphere out there, then it's not just intelligent life; it's super intelligent life. You're talking about a galactic level civilization that could do something like that, aren't you? To completely harness the entire energy output of the sun. You know, I mean, that's Dyson's idea was incredible, but it's also his logical progression of how a civilization would develop from a planetary to a solar system to a galactic level, and it's just the sort of thing that you'd want to have if you had a civilization on that kind of order dealing with those sort of forces. I mean, that would be amazing. That would be truly amazing.
I mean, I'd recommend Carl Sagan's Cosmos, where the TV series where he actually talks about this. But this was made before all these breakthroughs happened. I mean, the discovery of Tabby Star was quite recent. It was by the Kepler Space Observatory actually found it, and the astronomer who found it was called Tabitha Boyajian, which is why they've named the star after her. Well, it's just an informal name, but it's nicknamed Tabby Star. Now, it's a long way away. I think it's 300 light years. Yet the kind of the Dyson sphere, as you said, is something that's beyond the capability of our species to build. We could never build something like this. Yet, if a species is capable of building something like a Dyson sphere or a Dyson swarm, these huge megastructures in space, then why would they not be capable of perhaps building some kind of interstellar spacecraft and perhaps visiting us and traversing those 300 light years and turning up on our doorstep?
Well, you know what, Ben? Taking 300 light years to get somewhere is only a problem if 300 light years is a long time for your species.
What if they live for 10,000 years? If your
lifespan is 3 million years, what's a 300-year journey?
Exactly. It's like it's nothing. It's like, in comparative terms, it's like us crossing the Atlantic on an aircraft. Yeah. I mean, so maybe they're on their way, or maybe they're already here. Like I said, maybe some of the UFOs are coming from Tabby Star originally. Just
to interject, one thing I mean, listening to you, both of you, then it was just really interesting picking up all that information. But one thing that just strikes into me, really, the question. This is aimed at you, Ben. With all your research and everything you've kind of got to this point, what do you think the aliens want? Who are they, and what do they want? This is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's anthropomorphizing them is very tricky to do. It probably wouldn't get us very far. I mean, it's rather like trying to. Well, I'll give you an example. Even some species on our planet appear to have a psychology that we can't quite fathom. And even a dog or a cat will sometimes do things that doesn't make any sense to us, and we'll go, why is the dog doing that? Why is the cat doing that? The dog and cat, they'll know because they're a dog and a cat. We don't know because we're human. Alternatively, there's many things that we do which there's no way that a dog or cat could ever comprehend, and you can't explain. If you can't explain to your dog how to change the tire on your car, for example, even though the dog can sometimes sit there and watch you doing it. And so we may be in a situation where we are, supposing we're dealing with something that is more intelligent than us, supposing we, according to the level of intelligence of some of these creatures out there, we could be the equivalent of a dog or cat, or maybe even a field mouse or a cockroach. And it's not just extraterrestrials, you see. We tend to think when we say extraterrestrials that these creatures are flying from some other planet. But what if they're coming in other worlds that may be parallel to ours within four-dimensional space, and they found some way of traversing through wormholes into our world in the same way perhaps that ghosts do, and things like that. So that adds more complexity to the situation. So as Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel say in their classic book AD After Disclosure, the big question is going to be, what are they? And Dolan and Zabel actually provide a long list of what they could be, and it's not just extraterrestrials. We could be dealing with a species that already lives on this earth and has been living beside us. Maybe comes from under the ocean. Maybe they subaquatic creatures.
So you'd say there's no way really of us now telling if they're good or bad, even.
At this point, we only know based on what their behavior, the behavior they exhibit from people who've had close encounters. Now, you'll hear a lot of people like Dr. Stephen Greer, for example, who will regard the aliens as all good. They're kind of almost angelic beings. And some of them indeed seem to exhibit very loving, very warm, very, 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 very nice and sweet behavior towards humans. There are others that are actually, luckily they're a minority, but there are some that do appear to be hostile and can be very unpleasant. The majority of them seem to be kind of disinterested observers. They're almost like they're studying us as a scientific specimen. That seems to be the greater part of the people who have believable and confirmable close encounters.
Right. Okay. So, and I mean, when I was really into this stuff, and I still am into it, as I said, it's just not been at the forefront of stuff I research nowadays. But the stuff that really intrigued me, it seems to be more about in the past, like in the 50s, even during World War II. It just seems to be around the time of Roswell. That's where we really had something going on, but since that time, it hasn't been as much substance. At least that's how it seemed to me. Would you say there was something relevant back then, or is it just how the conspiracy researchers have been has played it out, so to speak?
Well, I do think actually that the so-called beginning of the UFO era, which was the summer of 1947, we can trace it very directly to that year, which is 70 years ago. Yeah, so it makes this particular time we're in now very, 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 very important. I'm actually organising a conference in Oxford on Saturday on this very, very subject. But yeah, the modern UFO era, Kenneth Arnold, Roswell, this was actually simply an emergence into the public eye of something that did exist before and always had done. Now, there's no doubt that in the late 1940s, the mid-1940s to late 1940s, there was an upsurge. Yeah. There was a worldwide flap, which actually contributed to this breakthrough into awareness within the mainstream with the flying saucer phenomenon. This could have many causes. It may be the beginnings of the use of nuclear weapons. which were first used in 1945 at the Trinity test site, and then at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. It's after that it appears there was an upsurge in the amount of UFO encounters. Roswell itself, the crash retrieval, this is when an object of extraterrestrial origin crashes to the Earth's surface and is secretly salvaged by the government, who then put out a cover story that it was just a weather balloon or something like that. That Roswell is not the only one of those events. It's not even the first. There's been at least 2 more before Roswell, and many, many since. Yeah, there's distinct evidence to say that. But so we are dealing with things. I mean, like for instance, the Betty and Barney Hill case of 1961. This was a couple from New Hampshire, USA, who were driving along a road one night, and basically this UFO landed beside the road, and they got out and they went on board. You know, it's the usual thing: the medical examination, they're shown star maps, etc., etc. They're called the very first UFO abductees, although when you actually look at it, Betty and Barney Hill were not the first UFO abductees, alien abductees. They were the first to be publicized widely. The fact of the matter is that there are many, many people before them who had the same experiences. In fact, it's hard to find a beginning to the reports of these sort of things. They used to be called abduction by fairies and goblins and things like that. But basically, there's every reason to suggest that people have been having these experiences since prehistoric times.
Yeah.
And so we're dealing with something perennial. We're dealing with a phenomenon, an extraterrestrial presence that has run parallel to our development ever since the very beginning. In fact, there's some people who said that humans were genetically engineered from apes millions of years ago to become humans by extraterrestrial genetic engineers. I mean, I haven't looked into that in detail, but there's some very, very interesting ideas about that. There's also a lot of reports that indicate that ancient humans in the early historical period were visited by extraterrestrials. I mean, there's intriguing evidence from South America, from ancient Egypt, and even in the Bible, which appears to indicate some kind of extraterrestrial presence at that time having intimate contact with humans. The book of Ezekiel in the Bible, for example, if that person saw what they did in the modern world, they would call it a UFO.
Yeah.
There's the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, where these angels apparently walk through the city and rescue somebody. I mean, that has all the indications of, say, a Men in Black type event. It's very, very similar to the Men in Black situation.
Well, to me, it seems, I mean, if you look at I'm kind of trying to broaden it out here as well. If you look at the whole New World Order, whatever you want to call it, the agenda, I mean, even I think the most, like skeptical person today could look at the political spectrum and see that something's afoot, something's going on. There just seems to be some sort of an agenda. Maybe not everyone, but I think I speak to a lot of people and they see it. Have you managed to maybe connect a few dots that you can link that disclosure something to do with this extraterrestrial presence that's having an effect on our politics and the elite? They feel, because it just seems like they're hell-bent on creating this one world, multicultural, utopian, one government, one religion, one everything. Everything's one. There's no identity. It's just this oneness, and we're just basically consumers in this big state. I mean, I'm sort of expressing how I see it there. But do you see that this extraterrestrial situation is very relevant to that, or is it something that's completely different and the political side is just a shambles by itself?
There's definitely a trend within politics that has been going on for as long as I can look back towards greater and greater authoritarianism and greater internationalism. And there's no doubt that the UFO situation is a part of that for several reasons. Firstly, it's to do with how we as a species regard ourselves, our place in the universe. As I said earlier, it seems to be very, very important to the powers that be that we as a species and as a planet regard ourselves as alone. We are this tiny little oasis of life in this infinite cosmic desert. And that vision, which I believe is false, is still being projected at us very, very vigorously by the powers that be. And at the very start of the space race in 1959, this was just after Sputnik went up and everyone's eyes were looking upwards. This think tank called the Brookings Institute issued a report which said that basically NASA, which had only just been formed and was just working on its very, very first rockets, would find signs of extraterrestrial life, even extraterrestrial life that was long past, especially intelligent life, it would not be a good idea to shout it from the rooftops because of the effect it might have on the relationship between the government and the people. The religious institutions, state institutions, etc., etc. And so they didn't actually specifically recommend a cover-up, but it did say so when reading between the lines. So that's, in a sense, that was the very start of the space age. So it gives a perfect precedent for instance, if these Mars probes were to come across some kind of microbial life, that NASA would suppress that information, keep it back for a time, perhaps when they believed at some point the government would reveal it at the right time.
More like now, Ben. Compared to the early days of exploration.
Well,
I wanted to come back on a few things that you've mentioned. Sorry, no, I've broken the flow. I've lost my own train of thought. Sorry, I was going to say, back to you mentioned scriptures. I mean, I'm not aware of a single scripture in existence that doesn't have something that could be interpreted as a UFO or extraterrestrial encounter. I mean, certainly, it's all the way through Abrahamism, and even all the way back to the Watchers, or the Nephilim, as they're sometimes called. So the whole basis of the Abrahamic religions is based on contact with intelligent, non-human life. Whether we think they're divine creatures or not is another matter, isn't it? But I wanted to talk to you about whether you felt there might be a connection between disclosure and emergence, by which I'm talking about AI emergence. And I wonder, could it be that we're not the ones they really want to talk to?
Oh, well, that would be very humbling, wouldn't it?
It would be a bit of a slap down the ego, wouldn't it? Yeah. But could it be that may be partly what their interest is? And I also, when you were talking about Roswell, I thought there is a very famous story, the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942.
Yeah.
Which we could perhaps argue that there'd been a UFO interest in humanity just before we started blowing up nuclear weapons, or while World War II was actually still on. But fed into the whole Roswell era that then followed. But with regard to emergence, could it also be that perhaps those extraterrestrials have got a use for man, but not in the form that we are in now? And that in connection with the emergence of AI is also the emergence of the transhuman. And that is a human that is changed with technology, so that perhaps we are destined in the designs of others to go out into the stars, but not as the species we are today.
Yeah, I mean, first,
we are a bit squishy, aren't we?
Definitely,
exposing us to the vacuum of space and the hazards of interstellar radiation and so on.
Exactly. I mean, we're not space survivable creatures normally, naturally. We haven't evolved that way. Now, as far as the Battle of Los Angeles goes, I mean, it's possible there was a connection between that incident and Roswell. However, UFOs do date back before the 1947 moment. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, there's a collection of UFO photos that I've seen which predate 1940, and they're very, very interesting indeed. Fact is that the emergence of more and more portable cameras is actually what has helped the increase in UFO photos since that time.
True, yes.
But as far as now, transhumanism is a big subject, and AI, which are connected, of course. Now, like anything else, I mean, these things can be used to do good or be used to do evil, depending on who's wielding them. And it's like weapons and technology are morally neutral. They can be used for legitimate purposes or for illegitimate purposes. Though AI and transhumanism is generally thought as something very, very benevolent. And there's a guy called Ray Kurzweil who's head of he works for NASA, interestingly, and for Google. And he's sort of the head honcho at the various transhumanist 2045.org, which is a transhumanist movement. And he waxes lyrical about how wonderful it would be because we could have like partly electronic brains, which could eventually become wholly electronic. We'll never forget anything. We'll never die because our memories can just be uploaded into a new server, etc., etc. But at the same time, the political classes might have a very different vision for how they regard the future of humanity. We could be looking at something rather dystopian in which they may want to develop some kind of slave class, which would be more like the Epsilons from Brave New World. If you remember that brilliant novel by Aldous Huxley.
Oh, yes.
Written in 1930, but years ahead of its time. It talks about a future in which people are not born; they're genetically engineered from the very embryo and very ovum to play certain roles within societies. So people who are deliberately bred to do very menial jobs have a lifespan of 20 years, and they have a very, very low IQ, and they can't speak because all they need to know how to do is sweep floors and empty dustbins. It's quite possible that the political classes of this world have a vision for us like that. So there's no need. They might not want us all to be alpha pluses.
Well, they're certainly not going to roll out life extension for everybody, are they?
I don't think they will. No, I mean they wouldn't want life extension for everyone.
No,
I mean. Well, they're quite happy to let to neglect a big block of flats so it bursts into flames and kills people, as we've seen recently. They're quite happy to.
I think the testosterone of men has gone down. In America, I assume it's probably the same in Europe, gone down about 20% in the last 2 or 3 generations. So that's not a good sign if they're trying to create sort of supermen, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are
factory chickens.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what they want. I mean, the chemicals. See, you're right. I mean, there's already changes in humans, which I look at and I think I'm very worried about. And one of those is androgenization, as you said. There are a reduction or a change in our hormone balance, which, for instance, which reduces sexual characteristics, which in turn leads to major psychological problems in terms of sexual identity. This is why you get like fashion shows in which men come on wearing pink dresses.
Well, this is where I get into a little bit of problems here, gentlemen.
Controversial subject now.
You're quite right that there are these enormous social changes, and as changes in the environment, changes in hormones, changes in fertility. And there's a lot, and also rising instances of abnormalities and autism spectrum disorders and birth defects of all kinds and so forth and so on. And I put these all down to general environmental degeneration of the genome. But the other part to emergence is that Oh dear, sorry, I'm having a blank brain day.
You've had a brain freeze, haven't you?
For the last 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm trying to catch something, and it's almost there, and it's just slipping out of my reach.
It happens to me before. Mr. Parry has dug me.
It'll come back to you. But I mean, it's the emergence. What you talk about, this is emergence would be the singularity. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, in terms of AI, there is an AI singularity, and there is a point at which machines' ability to create their own software and improve and design further improvements to themselves will create a kind of quantum process where that just accelerates. And with AI, one of the problems we have is that anthropomorphization that you were talking about earlier, Ben. It's difficult to anthropomorphize aliens, and it's very difficult indeed. I think we could basically boil it down to they're interested in Earth because there's life here, and that makes it more interesting with planets where there's not. We could probably say that. But anything beyond that is a bit difficult. But with AI, we start off with like a mouse AI, that can navigate a maze, and then we get on to a sort of dog or cat AI that can, interact in more complicated ways. But then we think, we're going to get to human AI and that's it. But it's not, because although in terms of evolutionary terms, it's taken us 200,000 years by good old slow evolution to get from an ape to a human being. That's at least the theory. For an AI, it might take it a long time to get from mouse to dog, but actually, in terms of intelligence, the difference between ape and human is really quite small. Yeah. So once it's got from dog, it's going to go zoom past human, and this is something that people like Stephen Baxter have been talking about in their work on AI. That we have this assumption that we can somehow manage AI in a kind of human-friendly form. But I think the reality is that once the self-aware network is in place, it's going to be a kind of amalgam of the military computers and the search engines and everything else. Heaven knows what kind of personality the thing will actually have. But we could be terrified of it. We could be in love with it. We can be polarized about it and say, "Oh, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be great." But what it's really going to be is it's going to be very challenging. But I keep coming back to this in relation to disclosure, because I have this feeling that if we do have the emergence of a super hard AI, the true super intelligence that the science fiction theorizes about, then that agent in its own right will more than likely forge its own relationship with other intelligences which are interacting with this environment. Whether they be alien or transdimensional or what they are, if it's right that those intelligences are there, they will not be able to hide from the emergence of AI. And perhaps it's through AI that we will finally have the full disclosure of what's out there. Just a train of thought that came to me.
It could be, John. I mean, the motive, and once you have something that is self-aware and self-organizing and can, as you said, reaches the singularity, which is when its processing power equals or surpasses that of the human brain, even if there's a way of developing a tame AI, one which is ultimately still under the control of humans, we only have nothing to fear if the only humans who are ever going to have any control of this AI are benevolent. If they choose to use it as some kind of weapon, which they will, and we know that they will try and do this, there are those who will, then that brings the problem is, do we need to deal with capabilities rather than professed intents when it comes to adapting this technology and actually implementing this technology in society? Because I'd be very wary of something that could be used as a weapon, even if the people who are developing say it won't be used as a weapon. I'd like to ask Ray Kurzweil this, because he doesn't seem to even consider this possibility.
Yes, yeah. Well, in terms of soft AI, it's already being deployed as an information weapon, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got chatbots. So just from the start of commercial operations, commercial chatbots, making phone calls, sending web messages, and so forth, trying to shift opinion. And then in the elections of the last year, an absolutely consistent theme all across the Western world has been hacking. And at the same time, left and right parties have made massive use of Twitter bots, and this has been exposed time and time again, and all kinds of soft AI programs which were used by the Trump campaign to identify possible supporters and target them with information. And the Labour Party was doing the same thing in the general election last month. The Conservatives were just throwing money at YouTube adverts like there was no tomorrow, which was pretty stupid and arrogant of them, but there you are. But in terms of the New World Order and its attitude to emergent technology, we're dealing with a bunch of egotistical sociopaths, aren't we?
Yes.
So they're going to think they can keep this genie in the bottle. But they're so desperate to use the genie to maintain their own power because they fear the loss of their own control. But very likely their push is to create emergence, but they don't really know what they're doing. This is my actual feeling about it. But we as individuals, what are we going to do? We can't detonate the cell phone towers and destroy the 5G signal, or at least not without, ironically, some kind of jihadist movement, which is a Luddite against technology. And I say we've got to find a way forward as ordinary people, where we can find some way of applying a sort of spiritual basis to these things, in terms of disclosure and emergence. And obviously, I'm not talking about being in a sort of the UFO cults that exist, which has been praying and waiting to get picked up for the last 70 odd years, but somehow, whatever they set a date, it never quite happens. I mean, these UFO cults have been going since the emergence of UFOs as a cultural phenomenon. Arguably, Scientology is another form of those. So I don't mean I don't mean a kind of adoring aliens, but we need to find some way where when these new realities open up above our heads and we find ourselves in a transformed world, which I think is happening a lot faster than we are able to be aware of, because we are way too distracted at other levels of things like politics, not looking at the big social movement pictures. We're going to have new realities emerging, and we're going to have to find a way to be ourselves in a bigger form, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as far as the socio-psychopaths of the New World Order goes, they will take any risk other than give up their power. I mean, they will destroy the earth before they give up their power. I mean, even if they have to do it deliberately. But definitely, I mean, what we can do practically is we don't have to become like the Unabomber and actually kill these people physically, but we can be cautious about how we use technology as individuals. We can warn our fellows about that. We can actually try to keep ourselves under control and be aware of how we can be manipulated and how we can be abused by technology. Even if it's just spam dexing. I mean, the things you talk about where the political parties target certain people for advertising. And this is done all the time to us anyway, for commercial purposes. However, how often have you looked at a web browser and then you go back and look at your ad page or check your spam folder in your emails and find adverts have been sent to you as a person which directly seem to appeal to your tastes? The reason is you've been spam dexed. A file has been built up on you, basically. It's completely automatic. It's a completely automated system, but this system has built up a file about you, and which it's about what kind of person you are, and then it targets specific adverts at you as a result.
And this could, of course, that's all soft AI.
Yeah, but this could be done. This could be done at any level, really, and I mean, it's only going to get more and more sophisticated. So, just firstly, being aware of that, being aware of the problem, being aware of how this could be abused. Now, it doesn't mean that there's some matrix coming which we're all going to be sucked into. I mean, we can resist this, you see. We can actually resist on a biological level as well. I mean, we were discussing hormones and things like that. And there's things such as the possibility of nanotechnology being used on us at the moment. And there's someone called Sophia Smallstorm who's done a lot of work on this. Have you heard of Morgellons disease?
Oh, definitely have, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very strange it is too.
Extremely, but there's a reason to believe that the Morgellons disease is actually perhaps a symptom of a healthy immune system, because it is the immune system actually rejecting pseudo-life and nanotechnology that has been given to us either through vaccines or through the chemtrails, whatever delivery platform they've used to actually install these devices or whatever they are into us. The Morgellons appears to be the human immune system rejecting them because of the nature of the discharge from the wounds. It appears to be some kind of a mixture between nanotechnology or archaic life.
It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's
rejection.
That's a good sign. That's a good sign that people are doing that.
I'm going to have to interject just quickly, because we if you can finish up what you were just about to say, Ben, and then we'll.
Yeah, sure. That to me is, I think, something we should take hope from, and the fact that we're not helpless. We're not just victims here. We can fight back. We humans are powerful, and humans have the ability to resist and hopefully put a stop to this. Right.
Yeah. We've gone over a little bit, but it's been one of those talks that is just fascinating. We could probably go on for another hour, but we're gonna have to draw it up. I mean, is there anything you'd like to add, Ben? Let our listeners know about any work you're doing or events you've got coming up. Please.
Any books you've written?
Oh, yes, I've written a book all about the UFO disclosure issue. It's a fictional book. It's a novel, but it deals directly with this possibility of disclosure, that what would happen if we had disclosure. It's called Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and it's by Ben Emlyn-Jones. It's available at all good bookshops now. If you can get to Oxford on Saturday, this Saturday the 8th of July, there's an event at the White House pub. That's not a joke. It's called the White House, and it's at 38 Abingdon Road, Oxford. And we're going to be talking disclosure, Roswell. It's the 70th anniversary of the Roswell incident, and so there's going to be an event connected to that. So do get there if you can. And I've got a website, HPANWO, HPANWO.blogspot.com, which is basically a portal as well, where I put all my stuff.
Great. I mean, if you send us a link to any of that stuff, I'll put it on the page when this show goes up. And that's great. Is there anything you'd like to add, John, before we wrap it up?
Oh, no, I think Ben's been very kind to me and responding to my random thoughts. So it's been really interesting to have a chance to talk to him, and he's a very dedicated man.
Brilliant. Well, and we'd definitely love to have you back on again, Ben. It's always great when you come on the show, and we should really do it more often. And thanks. Yeah, and we'll have to wrap this one up.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Thanks.
Yep, cheerio.
And that was Ben Emlyn-Jones. Thoroughly enjoyed that, as I know I would. What do you think of that, John?
Ben's a very erudite guy. He's just looked into all of his areas so deeply for so many years. The more you dig, the more layers come out. And what about this and what about that? You know, and it was fantastic to have a chance to talk with him.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got some really cool guests lined up for the show and stuff. But one of the things I wanted to do is just kind of look around for a lot of people I've worked with or at least socialised with. Because of the inspiration behind shows like this, and Ben and yourself are definitely in that bracket. So that's what I wanted to bring on the show a little bit more. And it would be great to, I mean, we already know yourself, John, you are going to be doing bits and pieces on this show a lot with me, which I'm really looking forward to. It'll be great to, and it'll be great to get Ben on the show to do more shows with us, because he's an intelligent guy, and it's interesting. I know a lot of people think the UFO thing's a complete load of mumbo jumbo, but a lot of people don't, and it's just whatever your views on it, it's just a very interesting subject to talk about, isn't it?
Well, if nothing else, look, nobody knows for sure when disclosure will happen, but we do know that the chances are very high that disclosure will happen. And it's one of those topics where it's good to have a general grounding in the perspectives which have built up around what will it mean. You know, so that should it happen, you've at least got some sort of framework to help you go forward from there with, and you're not running around like a headless chicken. Oh my God, the aliens have shown up. You know. So I think on that basis alone, it's a topic where it's good to have a handle on it. Because it does interact with things in lots of different ways, and I know I kept banging on about emergence during that talk, but it's an intuition there for me, Paul. But I just feel there's a big connection between these two things. Yeah.
Well, as I say, it would be great. We will be getting Ben back on. I know he enjoys doing the show with us, so you will be hearing from Ben again. And with that, I think we have definitely got to wrap it up. Please keep telling your friends about the show, keep linking the show, and more importantly, keep downloading the show. We're going to be looking forward to the next one. Till then, take care, and we'll be seeing you. Bye.
Bye-bye.